Hi, yeah, so I decided I will make my first Grasshopper plugin kind of video, but the one where I show you how to do it from scratch, in the sense of what happens if you just try to Google it, right? Because especially for this first type of plugins video, there are some explanations and tutorials, but if you just follow what's written, it's sometimes harder to do it on your own, and it's easier if you watch someone do it and maybe explain a couple of things along the way. So it's a relatively short video for a, let's say, a tutorial, but I just wanted to show you how to create a first Grasshopper plugin and your own component from scratch, and that there is really nothing much to it, and that you can do it very easily in 10 minutes. So let's start. Okay, so it's Wednesday morning, and I want to make a Rhino plugin for the first time, a Grasshopper plugin for the first time. So what would I do? Let me try to Google it, right? Grasshopper 2.0 release date. We'll see about that soon. Grasshopper developer, let's see, Rhino Grasshopper guides. Let's click here. That makes sense. Developer.rhino3d.com guides Grasshopper. Okay. I will be interested in getting started, right? So I'm on Windows now. If you're on Mac, you can follow the Mac version, but your first component, I will want to look at that first, and then we'll see what's there yet. So installing tools, I'm not going to read this in front of you, but I see that I need Visual Studio. And I know there are free versions of Visual Studio called Visual Studio Community, which is exactly what they are talking about here. And they even give me the link, which is great. That means that I can download the Visual Studio, and I can download a community version. So that's the good news. You can install this community. It's completely free, and you can work with it. And when you install that, it's important, you will see it says here you will need the net desktop development, right? What does that mean? Well, let's just Google that shortly. Visual Studio net desktop development. Let's see, images. Here it is. So when you install, you will see something like this. The Visual Studio will ask you what you want. So what you want is this net desktop development check for sure. There are other things that you can use: desktop development with C++, universal Windows platform development. I would recommend this Windows platform development because there is a lot of things there. So both of these up checked for sure, and then the others only if you need them. So we will not go into details because this is just making of our first plugin, right? And then it says I need to launch my Visual Studio. Okay, so let me launch my Visual Studio. And I can actually continue without code here, right? Before we create a project, I can continue without code and open a Visual Studio without anything. And it says I should go to extensions and manage extensions. Okay, let me split the screen so we can do this more easily. Extensions and manage extensions. Okay, and then I can go to online and I can search for something. Let me search Rhino Common. Here it is, project templates for Rhino 3D, for Rhino Common and Grasshopper projects. I have this installed. If you don't, you have to install it. This download button here. I don't have it because it's already installed. And look at it, what it says. It says, congratulations, you have the tools to build custom Grasshopper components for Grasshopper. Now what? So these are all the tools that we need: Visual Studio, and of course Rhino installed, Rhino 7 at the moment, but this same principle works for Rhino work in progress, which is about to be Rhino 8. So let's look at our first component, right? Once I have that installed, I can go to File, New, so to start a new project. And now, because I have those project templates installed in extensions, I can choose to build a Rhino Common plugin for Rhino, or Grasshopper Assembly with C# or Grasshopper Assembly with Visual Basic and so on, VB.NET. So I will want to create a Grasshopper Assembly for a Rhino 3D. Grasshopper Assembly is a DLL. It's basically a Grasshopper plugin. And You see, it will probably tell you here to do that, but let's not follow this. Let's see what happens in Visual Studio once I do that. And I say my project name, and said my first GH plugin. And the location, let me just put it somewhere on the desktop. I'll create a new folder, say GH. I will select that folder, and the solution name will be my first GH plugin. So it will create a solution and a project. We're not going to discuss that now. What's the difference between those two? We're creating our first plugin. We're moving fast, breaking things. And that's it. And now we have a dialog that looks like something here. Again, you can leave everything by default. Target version is Rhino 8 here. We can put Rhino 7 for now, depending on what you want to develop for. I have Rhino 8 work in progress installed. That's important because when you do debugging, it will use this location. It will use the actual location of Rhino exe file. We're not going to use WPF or Windows Forms for now. Let's leave that for the future. And we finish, and this is it. It will create our first Grasshopper plugin. And now let me close these properties here. You will see there are some files here that we are not going to explain in detail, but there is the name says it. Like this is the plugin info. So the info regarding your actual plugin. This is the name. You can actually change it here. This is the unique identifier. Every plugin needs to have one. And then there are some empty fields like the name and contact, which is not that important. And this is a component. So this is actually a one single component that belongs to this plugin, and once you install it in Rhino, you will be able to see this component. As you see, component has couple of things. It has when we hover here, we see that it's a name, nickname, description, category, and subcategory, and so on. The important thing to understand is that inside the Grasshopper, you already have categories there. We will just see that in a moment. So if you put one of the names or of categories and subcategories that already exist, then you will put your component there. If you put here a unique name, if I say Milos category and Milos subcategory, then it will create basically a new category, as you will see in a moment. So let's debug it, but debugging is done by pressing here debug or start debugging, F5, or just simply pressing play here. So that's why that location of Rhino was important. It will now open Rhino and start to debug it. But let's see what it says here while it's opening Rhino, right? Let's see what it says here. Since the first time you're debugging the components, you need to tell Grasshopper where to look. In the Rhino command prompt, run the Grasshopper developer settings. So Grasshopper doesn't know by default where your component is, because our component in our Visual Studio, if you remember, we put it on our desktop, right? Here it is. Here is on the desktop. So we need to tell Grasshopper to look there while we are developing it. Later we can move it to some other place. So Grasshopper developer settings. So I already have some thing that I've been developing at the moment, and so I'm going to add a folder, and I'm going to where my plugin is, and I'm going to add the bin, because inside the bin and inside the debug or release, whatever version you're making, will be the actual plugin. Will be the Grasshopper assembly file. And once I do that, then the Grasshopper will know how to find it. Let's see if we need to do something else. Uncheck the memory load. Did we do that? It's unchecked. That's good. Click the add folder, and optionally automatically start Grasshopper every time Rhino starts. We don't want to do that at the moment. So let's see if we start with Grasshopper. You see, Milos cat. That's the category that I defined, and here is here is the subcategory, and inside is my first component. And so this is my first component, and here it is. It doesn't do anything by default. It's just have a nickname, which I didn't change. So let's stop debugging for a sec. Reload, stop debugging. We can change the nickname to my name. And we will think about now, we will talk about now what is here, what is an input and what is an output, how to actually define your component. And that is relatively easy. But in the next video, actually, I'm going to make a separate one where we will create one component from scratch. And that's going to explain much more what's happening here. The name says it all, register input parameter. So every component has input, right? So if you want to register input parameters, you will say p manager, and you will say what do you want to add as an input parameter. You see there's all these types of geometry and data that you can add, like from B-reps, lines, curves, numbers, whatever. So let's say I want to add some number parameter, whatever, and then let's say it tells you that it needs a name. I will say name A, nickname can also be A, description is first number, and then the access. It's this is important to tell Grasshopper if it's just a single item or it's maybe a list or a tree, multi-dimensional one. For now, it's a single item, right? And as these hello world examples always go, you usually add two numbers. So let's add two numbers. Second number is also an item. And those are my two. So as a register output, again, I can have a curve, I can have a line, I can have whatever, but in our case we are again going to go with a number just to keep it simple, and we will say C, and we will say result, and again it is going to be a single item. So we have our inputs, we have our outputs. So now we actually have to solve this distance. So in order to solve the distance, we have to access these input parameters. These input parameters are saved in an object that's, as you can see here, it says it can be used to retrieve the data for input parameters. And we use the function called getData to do that. And we access basically the position of the element in the array. Because we added these two elements one after the other, we know that the A has a position of 0. In computer programming, arrays start with 0, and the other will have the position of 1. And so we will give it a position of 0, and we will say it will be held in a variable A. But we don't have the variable A yet. So let's define then variable A, and define the variable B, and we will pass it by reference because that's what this function tells us that we should do, as you can see. And we can get the other number as well. So the other number, it has the position 1 in the array, and the value will be saved in this value. Now you can put in some checks, for example, if you want. If you say that if A is smaller than 0 or if smaller than 1 because you expect a number, then you can simply say return. You can even export some error messages. For example, there is a, how is it called, add runtime message, and then you can say what type of message is it. Let's say it's a warning or an error, and then say I need A to be at least 1. And that means that in Grasshopper, if the A is smaller than 1, you would get that red little warning that says that you can't actually perform, and the solution will not be achieved. But in our case, we do not want to perform any checks. We just want to do the result. So how do we get the result? It's simple. Instead of get data, we say set data. And what data do we want to set? We want to set a single number. So it's not a list. We don't export a list of things, an array of things. We export a single thing. And what do we export? We have our array here of exports, of output parameters. We zoom that in a bit, so we see a little bit, everything a little bit better. So we have an array here of output parameters. So our array has only one member, which will be at the position 0. and we will export it like this. So we exported the data into a variable called res, but we don't really have that variable, right? So let's set that variable, right? Let's say our result is also a double. It's called res, yeah? And it's not 0, 0, it's a plus b. That's what we're doing here, right? Where is the plus? Here it is. So our result is a plus b, and that's what we will put in this output parameter by accessing it like this and setting the data. And believe it or not, this is enough. This is enough, just because before we set this up, you notice that the other plugin doesn't have an image yet. I'm not going to go into images now. You can maybe a little bit explore that for yourself. You could add a project, you could add a resource, new resource, an image, and add it to the project, but let's discuss that some other time so that this video is not crazy long. And let's start debugging. And now, as I said, we still don't have an image here, but we'll solve that some other time. I have my components A and B and the component C, right? So I can put some slider to it or whatever. Let's say I put a slider, I put another slider, and I can check the result here. As I change the number, I see that these two numbers are being added together. So this is now your very own custom component, and it can get very complicated. The other project that you had there, this is how it looks, creating some paths for some 3D printing, concrete printing robots, but we'll get there slowly. The most important thing is here was to show you that by following these kind of instructions, you can get up and running very fast. I will make another additional video to this one just to explain the component a little bit more, and as I said, we're gonna create one from scratch. All of this will be created from scratch, which will make you then understand the files here. But there is really not much to understand because it's very simple. Once again, the plugin info, the component info. See, the plugin has its own ID, the component has its own ID. Once we create a new one, we'll have to create our new unique identifier. And then the dependency, because you started a template, you started a Grasshopper template, the dependencies were solved for you automatically. So you see here inside packages, Grasshopper was installed together with a Rhino command, and it was connected to your project. And here you see that the version is 7.13. Later on we'll see that you can manage that, you can update that to newer versions, even to 8 and so on. But let's stop here, make your own first Grasshopper component, and we'll continue from there. Have a nice Wednesday afternoon. Bye bye.